Now, in the last episode, we built the forms. In this episode, I'll be leveling the forms, I'll be straightening the forms, I'll be putting rebar in the forms, and then we'll be placing concrete in the forms. This is a lot, so hang on to your hats and let's get going. Firstly, we need to put some 90-degree bends in the half-inch rebar in order that it'll fit into the corners of the footing. All I'm using to bend the rebar is a 4-foot length of pipe, which I took from one of my carpentry pipe clamps, and a 2x4. And on the 2x4, you want to put marks every couple of feet, and then that 2x4 acts as your ruler to help you put the bend in the right spot. Using a string line as a guide, straighten the inner form. Don't worry about the outer edge of the form at this point. We'll get to that later. Using the string line as your guide, move the edge of the form in or out as required to form a straight line. Then lock that in place by driving stakes into the ground and securing the formwork to the stakes. In this case, the segment of the footing we're working on is level. But if that weren't the case, if the excavation was slightly higher in one corner than another, then always start at the highest point and work toward the lowest. It's always easier to raise the formwork up a little bit and use a screw in the stake to secure it rather than trying to dig out some excavation to lower the formwork. Once the form is level, secure it to the stakes that you've already driven and use screws. Now the entire inside of the formwork has been leveled and straightened. We're going to do largely the same procedure to get the outside of the form level and straight. But when it comes to leveling, you don't need the builder's level anymore. You can just use a 3-foot spirit level because you're leveling the outside form to the already leveled inside form. Using 1x4s, make some spreaders. Now, the idea behind a spreader is it'll go across the two edges of the form and will keep the form from distorting once the pressure of the concrete is inside the form. They also have a secondary purpose. You use those spreaders and some wire to hang the rebar from, to ensure that the rebar is held up from the excavation itself. And thirdly, the spreaders can be used to attach the vertical dowels, which will really bond the footing to the foundation wall, which is the next step after the footing. A typical shop or house requires that you use 1/2-inch rebar throughout. Now, when you have to secure the rebar to itself, we call that lapping. And when you lap it, you have to have a minimum distance. In the case of 1/2-inch rebar, it's 48 times the diameter. So 48 halves comes out to 24 inches. That's the minimum lap. And in my case, I always secure the lap with 3 points, and then you secure the rebar to the spreaders to keep it off the ground. Now, you want to have the rebar about 1/3 of the way up from the excavation to the top of your form. With Mrs. Rover's help and a chalk line, I snap a line down the center of the formwork. Now, this will give me an index line to which I put the vertical dowels. And the vertical dowels I want right dead center of what will be the foundation wall. The vertical dowels are essentially 1/2-inch rebar that has been shaped so that I can attach it to the existing rebar in the footing. It turns 90 degrees and it comes up in the center of what will be the foundation wall. I then secure this to the spreader to keep it from moving around when we're placing the concrete. The completed footing, all prepped and ready for the placement of the concrete. concrete work is such that you're just not going to be able to do it yourself. So in this case, I've reached out to a couple of my handy neighbors, and they've graciously offered to give me a hand. Now that the concrete has been placed in the forms, you have to strike the concrete off to the height of the forms. Now to do this, you'll need a float. A float, in my case, is nothing more than a 1x4, and then I attached a 2x4 handle to it. Now that the footing has been floated entirely, it's time to put a keyway in. A keyway is just a little divot that you put the entire length of the footing, and it helps secure the foundation wall to the footing. Meanwhile, my good friend and neighbor Gerry is using the excess concrete to make small little paving stones. It's always good to have an idea of what to do with the excess concrete, because you really can't just order just enough. You have to have a little bit extra just in case you were short or some other catastrophe perhaps happened. Join me in the next episode when I build the foundation wall for my shop.